That's it. And sometimes to make significant change, you need the best thing or good things, and not taking less money for a mediocre solution, especially when the time is a limit in species. So the question is, first of all, do we have the basic numbers maybe a bit wrong? Maybe can we change the anchoring that is already there? Second of all, what I saw in South Africa is that there are about 30 groups for rhinos. How do you, as people who donate money, because I think this is part of the issue. I think that the person that gives or donates the money can also stop the fact that there are 30 groups going around, as long as you are giving it only to one or two that dealing with one issue, and not spreading it over 30 groups, some of it using it actually for rhinos and some for their own vehicles and houses. And the third thing I wanted to say to Alan, I think was, yeah. Well, the defense industry is $1.3 trillion a year industry, which is a lot of money. I believe that we can make them change, or at least contribute their share, either by a minuscule percent of their income, or by taking what they actually use, the system that they develop for different reasons, and we can actually use it for conservation. Amazing things that can be done if you know to choose which one for which system. So actually, my main question was about the numbers game. So how do you change the basic number that you're using?
Perfect. Let me collect one or two more questions first, and then we go back to the panel. Who else?
I've got a two-tier question here. Did you say that the triage method was one of the methods which you use in selecting projects, or did I misunderstand?
No. What I said is that actually the triage argument is sometimes repeated by certain sectors of the conservation community to highlight the fact that there's always less resources than we have money available for conservation. But the triage argument is a very tricky one, because once you start doing that, you start to actually assuming that you will let certain species go and others not. And I believe that if you go on that road, there's no end to it. So I don't think it's a valid approach for. Of course, everybody has to prioritize certain things, but I think that it's fundamentally flawed assumption to assume that if we can recover a species, at least if you assume you had money, then you shouldn't let it go. I mean, that's I think where we should draw the line on the sand.
I come to my second point on part of what I was going to say then. I think if there's something that should go extinct, it's the triage method, to be honest. Because we have many examples of, I come from Mauritius, I come from the Mascarenes. We have many, many, many examples of things which were, according to Myers, should go down into oblivion, which have not gone down in oblivion. The Mauritius kestrel, which you know very, very well of, that is specifically said by Myers, that's a species you forget about, and we proved Myers wrong. So the triage method is certainly not something to vindicate at all. And there are many other examples. And also I disagree that conservation should cost a lot of money, because we've shown in the Mascarenes that we can do it on small budgets. It just means that you don't pay for extra things that are extra. You focus on your species. If you're going to divert into education, divert into this, divert into poverty alleviation, this is going to cost a lot of money. But if you focus on your species, and you focus on, because it's not rocket science, it's not nuclear science, you can do it on small budgets. And if you're not paying big sums of money for salaries and equipment and vehicles and all of that, it doesn't have to cost that much money.
Picking up on his question, if we focus on species, which at the Crane Foundation, that's our mission, we also realize that you can't save a species without addressing the human needs and the needs of the environment around it, the habitat. I wonder we get that it's a systems thinking process. How well do the donors get that?
Okay, I'm going to hand it back. We'll have another round of questions. I'm going to hand it back. Maybe you Ash, sir?
Just
No.
one other quick thought for the lady from South Africa. I think if you change the word from emotion to passion, I think donors do understand that.
Thank you, sir. Okay, back to the panel. There with your microphone. So whoever wants to take whichever questions, are we pegging the amount of money correctly? Do we need a lot of money? Is it expensive to do species conservation? Can we afford to have so many NGOs in the field competing for funds?
I'm going to answer the question that was specifically raised around rhino, and if I can just correct you, at the last count we counted 270 organizations in South Africa raising money for rhino. And without getting into detail, I think it raises quite an important point. We've been talking now about the difficulty of bona fide NGOs raising money from bona fide donors. We, particularly in our country, are experiencing a massive problem, and that is the non-bona fides taking advantage of opportunities like the rhino poaching crisis. It is not difficult to register a non-profit organization in South Africa, and half the time donors, and I'm talking now members of the public, tin collecting, Facebook appeals, I mean social media has opened up an enormous opportunity for fundraisers to get active without even proving what they're doing or who they are. And donors in that environment, and now I'm definitely excluding the donors from foundations and organizations such as these, but the individuals out there very seldom even check on these organizations. They get caught up in the emotion and the passion, and there's an enormous amount of money that's being routed at the moment to organizations that have no track record in rhino conservation and absolutely no potential to do anything about it. And then they use the words such as awareness and education, which gets thrown around wildly, and everybody's now suddenly a conservationist. And I think that that's probably doing the fundraising environment more harm than our inability to get money because we've written proposals incorrectly. We can learn from that, and the bona fide organizations will bump their heads if they do something wrong, but they'll try again. But we're competing for pots of money right now that's being dissipated amongst literally everyone and their dog. And it's a huge challenge, and we can't stop them. They're not doing anything necessarily illegal. We go on a campaign to shut down every other small player in the country, and we start looking like the sour grapes. And so, I think just very, very briefly, the way around that is that one has to make sure that the credible organizations stick to what they do extremely well, communicate the good stories, communicate the successes, and hopefully start educating your donor. But just wanted to a point of correction on that, 270 at the last count.
I'd like to pick up on the same question. You raised it, Adam, and the number of NGOs and players. With SOS, we have one target, is the private sector. And the way we present ourselves, we know we are the best network of experts, which is the Species Survival Commission of IUCN. We can advise, we know we have eyes and ears everywhere in the world, we know what the people are, we know what the needs are. So that's what we tell the donors. And on top of that, we don't take money for our own projects. So of course we need a little bit of money to manage the entire program, but we don't fund our projects. So that's a message we give to the donors because they are completely confused. Each time we go to one company, they have a small partnership with one NGO. Sometimes it's a project which has no real conservation value. They do good thing, and I think they are completely confused by the number of approaches. They are bombarded with questions. I heard somebody, Simon, you gave me a number about somebody who is quite famous and rich. We receive how many emails a day? 100 a day or something requesting for money. I mean, they're bombarded, the people, with money coming from all different ways. So that's really important that we really merge forces, and that's what is behind SOS. I mean, we put some big names behind SOS, such as the World Bank, IUCN will bring credibility, and we sell the implementers, the network. We say, don't worry, we are going to sort this out for you because you're completely confused. It's still a challenge. It's still a challenge to sell that they believe us. Even if you are IUCN, Secretariat, you produce the release, you have all these networks, you convene these events, the people out there, they don't trust you, they don't know us. Even IUCN, they don't know us. And it's sometimes very disappointing. I don't know if I don't sleep at night because of that, but it's absolutely astonishing. So each time you walk on someone, so that's a struggle we have because we don't want to put any group out of business because maybe they do something good, but you have some companies just giving maybe, I don't know the numbers, but maybe 10,000, 20,000 to an NGO, and that's great, they feel great because they've done that. What they could do, they could give 10 times more if we were more powerful, more unified. And I'll finish by one example because that's happened in SOS. We had, and I don't mention any location, any species, but that's something that probably happen other times. We selected a project. We have an excellent project in SOS. We found it was good. It was in the top 10, top 5, I can't remember. And suddenly, the NGO, the people who submitted the project, started to fight and split in 2 groups openly. What happened as a donor? They didn't get the money, which we were very sad about that. They just decided to split for unknown reason. Everything was really packaged. I'm not sure if they are going to survive. It's just because at the end of the day, we have human beings. We all want to do what we like without any pressure on us. But that's not the way it's going to work. It's fun to do. I'm not sure it's viable. I had an NGO in the past before being, so I struggle with fundraising, all these kind of things. So I went through all that as an implementer in a small NGO I created. It's a struggle. So we need to find ways to go more together, join forces.
Just wanted to make a point with regards to the people living around the species. I think, you know, the intrinsic approach is actually saying, okay, there's a bumblebee bat that lives in a cave in Thailand. This is where he lives. What's it? Who lives in his neighborhood? What do they do? What level of income? What are their needs? How can they interact with each other? What are the people around them need? What are the threats? Talking about proposals, you get a proposal, but there's no, political overview of, we're in the Congo, okay, well, how does that actually going to affect your project? And, you're going to give your money to, let's proposal for a marine, buy some land in a place that's going to get nationalized in 3 months. So I think also is actually understanding, I think we have to, there's 7 billion of us. I think at the first Rio conference there were 5 billion of us, now there's 2, now there's 9 billion of us, no, other way around. There were 5, now there's 7. We're expecting another 500 million in Africa in the next 40 years. So you have to plan for this and factor this into the analysis. And I don't think the approach that I'm talking about is, value life and ignore everything around it. But I do think we have to break it down, by species, where they live, what kind of neighborhood do they live in. If you're in the species in the Congo living in Canada, you get a very different, geopolitical environment around you that we have to deal in. So I think, it's not something we have to ignore, but probably be very helpful for people put these in proposals and acknowledge that and actually created that context as well. Because currently just say, okay, I'm a species intrinsic guy, so I better throw in something that, makes money for the people around the animal, and then that's all great. But actually, actually increase consumption and potentially increase threats if it's mismanaged. So I just think, we'll have to admit how incredibly complicated this is. And you were saying about bats, it's also the details and actually just really breaking it down. I think maybe that's where the species approach makes sense, because every single animal has a story, has its own little ecosystem, is affected by different things, affects different things. And I think the work, needs to be done. It's the work we're attempting to do in Synchronous the Earth, is actually do this kind of work on each creature and each threat, and actually try and take the time to understand the geopolitical and economic context that the species finds itself in.
Just to respond to the question about funding and do we not have enough big grants, if I were to be able to create the funding environment, it would look something like an upside-down triangle, and at the top you would have a massive amount of grants that are very small going out to different projects, and you'd have both seed funding and you'd have some long-term funding. And in the conservation movement we completely lack the longer-term funding, and to be successful in any project it's going to take about 10 years. So that would be the largest level of funding, and then you'd look at what's successful in that range, where you've developed relationships, where you know the community, where you're pretty sure you can drive something forward. Then there's the next level, and you're getting quite a large amount of funding going into that section. And then at the bottom of the period is a few massive projects at a very large scale, where we know that we're going to be successful, and we've sort of invested through the triangle. And I think that's actually what we need. So we don't actually need, at this point, just tons of large grants. And I go to countries all around the world where I see a large amount of money that's just been dropped in and is meant to spend it in a very short time period, and it's an absolute disaster. You haven't figured out who the partners are. The body who's giving the money hasn't really made the effort to figure out who the people are that they should be working with, and the money just gets wasted. So I'd rather see smaller investments for across a broad span, see what's successful, then go to the next level. That's what we need in the conservation movement.
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, you know, if we were living a dream and tomorrow we would get $27 billion, I assure you that we couldn't use that money effectively. There's no way that there's absorptive capacity to use that money in a productive way. So this is a longer term endeavor. And again, the financial flow, a regular financial flow, is what makes the difference. And of course, there are species that are much more costly to conserve than others, of course. And I would assume that this is, if you do that on a very detailed basis, you're going to see a long curve with a long tail. You're going to have a species like the tiger. It costs a lot of money. And others, one that I've been involved in Brazil, and I saw Glaucia Moreira here. I don't think she's not now. For the Leo's macaw, that cost tens of thousands of dollars of initial investment, and then a few thousands of dollars a year, and the population has doubled in the space of 15 years. So you can have those things. Now, I was very intrigued by this notion that of the fundraising crowding that you mentioned, and I have a hard time understanding why. I understand the frustration, but why, if you have 200, 300, 400 organizations mobilizing resources for a species, there's something positive going on there. I mean, even if most of the money initially is not being used well, I think that the awareness that this is generating, and eventually, if this continues, just by market forces and natural selection, you will tend to actually get the best organizations that are most active to actually capture progressively larger chunks of the action, so to speak. So I would tend to think that if you have 500 organizations putting resources out, getting resources, it shouldn't be a bad thing. And maybe perhaps what one could do is getting better and better at capturing those resources amongst these competing organizations. But I find it quite good, because one of the things that we need to do is actually put the species plight in front of the public, in front of donors, in front of those who have money. So, I mean, I understand, but sure.
I actually realized when I finished that I didn't clarify maybe quite an important point, and that is that I think I would agree with you that bona fide conservation organizations, and I do believe the more the merrier, because there's just not enough work. I mean, there's more work than there are NGOs, so this is not competition. But what I'm referring to, and it might be peculiar to Southern Africa, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but these are organizations using the plight for fraudulent fundraising. And that's what I'm referring to. This money is not even going anywhere near conservation. And what it's doing is it's frustrating a public that is they're having a cause that's being used to extract money from them, and then they see absolutely no benefit come of it. A lot of them don't even survive for a year. And a lot of them, the amount of fraud that's going on behind the scenes of tax evasion is huge, and that's giving us all a bad name. So I just wanted to clarify, this is not competition against other organizations, because I agree with you. The more of us that are out there doing good work and raising money and getting a public that's aware, absolutely. But this is particularly to big causes that grab the public imagination and seem to unleash a lot of fraudulent organizations that put good ones out of business. So just to make that distinction.
I just want to go back to this idea that was raised by, I think, Gustavo and Jonathan, about longer-term approaches, I guess you're getting into. I think one of the problems that most, in the fundraising business generally, is that most donors want to fund 3, or if you're very lucky, 5-year projects. And even if it's a big one with lots of money, even there you can't claim a massive amount will be changed, because most of the problems we're dealing with are very long term. And I think there's probably a growing amount of evidence that conservation success is probably pretty highly correlated with the length of time that program has been running. So if you look, I mean, rhinos have been discussed quite a bit here. Rhinos are unusual in that they cost much more to conserve than most species. But if you look at the countries which have had recovering rhino populations, those have had long-term funding over decades of funding, but for most species, I think probably what we actually need is smaller amounts of money over longer time periods. And I can think of some examples. If you look at the Darul Wildlife Conservation Trust in Mauritius and other groups, and I know Vikash was back there, a lot of that work has been done on fairly small amounts of money, but very long term. Mauritius Kestrel, if I understand it rightly, but it was long term. It kept on going and going and going and going. And there's examples. Vietnam is often thought of as the country with some of the the worst species conservation problems, but there's one primate, critically endangered primate species, the cat barlango, recovering. Munster Zoo have been funding a very long-term project. Probably, I don't know the funds, but it's probably only $50,000 a year or less. I don't know. It's not much, but it's long-term. And the relations with the community have really been sorted out and worked on. And I think if we can somehow find ways of creating funding mechanisms that look like that, rather than trying to make big claims of what you can achieve after 3 or 5 years, with money that actually over-invests and goes beyond the absorptive capacity of the situation, then that would help a lot.
Thank you, Simon. We have one more question. I'm sorry, Fred, you go first. Okay, one more question from the floor.
Thanks. Hi, guys. This might be a little bit to the side, but it's something I've been thinking about for a while. So if we accept that there's a disparity between the funding that's available and the funds that are applied for the good projects, so like JC was saying, you even with the money you had available, you weren't able to fund all of the good projects that SOS received, and I know the same is true of the MZ fund. I wonder if there's a space now as a community of conservationists to consider a slightly different, perhaps less linear approach to